Tonight at 6, a glimmer of hope here in Ukraine as Russia says it will drastically reduce military operations around the capital Kyiv and the city of Chernihiv. It follows some progress at peace talks in Istanbul, the first face-to-face negotiations for a fortnight. But on the front lines near Kyiv, Ukrainian forces are not dropping their guard and they say they're confident of victory. Hello, good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. There's been a glimmer of hope at face-to-face peace talks today between Russia and Ukraine. The negotiations, hundreds of miles from here in Istanbul, were the first for a fortnight. Ukraine confirmed it was prepared to be a neutral country and to abandon ambitions to join the NATO military alliance, in line with key Russian demands. Well, for its part, Moscow announced what looks like a change of military strategy. It now says Russian troops will drastically reduce their operations around the capital Kyiv and in the northern city of Chernihiv and focus instead on Donbass in the east of the country. Well, more on that from Kyiv in just a moment, but our first report tonight is from our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
Away from the fighting, another attempt at diplomacy. Delegations from Ukraine and Russia came to Istanbul. But would there be any room for compromise? Negotiating behind the scenes, the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich. Today, the Kremlin dismissed reports he'd been poisoned at a previous round of talks as an information war. President Erdogan was the host. He called on both sides to push for peace.
It will be in everyone's interest to achieve a ceasefire and peace as soon as possible. As members of the delegation, you have taken on a historic responsibility. The whole world is waiting to hear good news from you.
At these talks, Ukraine made concrete proposals to Russia it hopes could end the conflict. Ukraine proposed becoming a neutral state. It won't join military alliances or host foreign military bases. In return, it's asked for a system of security guarantees, with other countries acting as guarantors. Ukraine also wants to discuss the status of Crimea and has asked Russia not to oppose Ukraine joining the European Union.
Our proposal has not been accepted yet by Russia. We are handing it over to the Russian side. We say this is our position, our official position. We will wait for their answer.
Russia's Deputy Defence Minister responded quickly.
The Ministry of Defence of the Russian Federation has taken the decision to drastically reduce combat operations in the Kyiv and Chernihiv areas in order to boost mutual trust and create the conditions for further negotiations and signing of the agreement.
If Russia does scale back its military activity around Ukraine's capital, that would mark a significant change in what Moscow calls its special military operation, but what most of the world calls Russia's war. An admission, perhaps, that after struggling to make advances, Russian troops have realised they can't take the city of Kyiv. But, and there are lots of buts here, Russia hasn't ceased hostilities in Ukraine. It made that clear today. Its troops are continuing to fight, although their main focus now, Moscow says, is on the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. And what about those areas in the east and their status under any potential deal? Also not clear. And remember, from the very beginning, Vladimir Putin's objective was to force the whole of Ukraine back into Russia's orbit. Will he really give up on that? Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine, the capital Kyiv has been a key target, but its forces have not got past the outskirts of the city. Now Russia is saying it will drastically reduce its offensive around the capital. The Ukrainian general in charge of defending Kyiv has told the BBC that Russia is suffering heavy losses and cannot win. Our international correspondent, Orla Guerin, sent us this report from a front line north of the capital.
Keeping watch on a critical front line to the north of the capital. The Russians now say they will drastically reduce attacks around Kyiv. These Ukrainian troops won't be dropping their guard. The man in charge of defending the city, Colonel General Alexander Syrski, was handing out promotions and medals today. He's been fighting the Russians in eastern Ukraine since 2014. Now they're on his doorstep. The Russians are 4 kilometers from here. Is it painful for you that they have come so far on this soil?
It's painful for me, especially here, because I fight against Russia 8 years, during 8 years. So I'd like to say together we are stronger, and we'll win.
He told me his men are being shelled constantly, but are on the offensive in some areas, and he insisted the Russians would never set foot in Kyiv. And inside the city, there is vigilance night and day. Territorial defence units out on patrol, through deserted streets now lined by checkpoints and roadblocks. Their mission to monitor any movements and search for the enemy within, saboteurs passing information to the Russians. After being stopped and searched, this man was allowed to go on his way. But in the past month in this area, they've detained about 30 alleged informants. A sudden threat over our heads. They spot a Russian drone and follow its path. I'm working on it, says this fighter, nicknamed Chechen. Well, it was quite tense here in the last few moments with that Russian drone overhead. It has now disappeared, but members of the unit say this is happening as often as 10 times a night. The Russians are sending their drones to try and gather intelligence from above. Then incoming fire. Russia says it will cut back its offensive around the capital. But fighters here remember it also said it had no plans to invade Ukraine. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, let's go live to Jeremy Bowen, who's in Kyiv. So, Jeremy, as we heard there, the Russians say they're scaling back their operations around the capital. Can we take them at their word?
Well, not if you're sensible. No, I don't think anybody will take them at their word, whether it's in Ukraine or in the wider world as well. Also, in terms of, you've been hearing in Steve's piece from Moscow that they're asking for guarantees of their future security if they become neutral. And they've said that they want that. In further clarification, they've said that they want that guaranteed by some of the big military powers of the world. Now, will the Russians agree to something like that? I wonder.
And Jeremy, when the Russians say they're scaling back, are they making virtue out of necessity? Because their advance on Kyiv has stalled, and the Ukrainians have been counter-attacking them now for days.
Yeah, they haven't made any progress towards the city, even encircling it now for weeks and weeks and weeks. They've taken casualties, they've taken bad tactical decisions, they've been caught up in the mud, they've lost men, they've lost machines. So, yes, that's part of it, I think, but, you know, they're not saying that they're going to have a ceasefire. They're saying they're going to concentrate on a different part of the country. Now, while I've been standing here, I've heard distant rumbles of artillery. I don't know who's firing it, and it's some miles off, but it means that it is far from quiet on those battlefields to the northwest of the city, where a lot of the military activity has been focused and, it seems, continues.
All right, Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Bowen there. Well, Russia may have said today it is scaling back some of its attacks in this country, and there may have been some limited progress at those peace talks. So perhaps there is just a small sliver of light amidst the darkness here. But after 34 terrible days, this war does grind on, taking with it more lives every hour of every day. Back to you in the studio in London.
Let's move on to events in Ukraine now, where there has been the biggest diplomatic breakthrough yet in fresh peace talks. Russia says it will pull back some of its invasion forces around the capital and another key city. Now, this is the latest assessment of the military situation in Ukraine. The red shaded areas are those controlled by Russia. Russia announced it will, as it put it, fundamentally cut back operations near Kyiv and Chernihiv in the north as part of ongoing peace talks. However, in other parts of the country, there appears to be no change. In Mykolaiv, in the south today, a Russian attack smashed a hole in the side of a government building, as John Ray now reports.
In slow motion, from the left side of your screen, the Russian missile can be seen. In the split second before an impact that shattered what had been a brief respite from war in the city of Mykolaiv. It left a gaping hole in a symbol of democracy. The regional headquarters of civilian government torn apart. 24 dead or injured, but the man the Russians hoped to kill escaped unscathed. The local governor, Vitaly Kim, who he met in the same building a few hours earlier. He's made a nuisance of himself to the Kremlin with morale-boosting social media posts. His car is famously converted to unconventional military use. But prophetically, he told us they lack the weapons to defend this kind of attack. What is it you need?
We need anti-air, we need anti-tank, and we need heavy weapon and radar system, anti-firing system. We need everything you had, we need.
His city is a staging post for survivors from the fighting a few miles to the south. This bus arrived with windows shot out and passengers whose nerves had been shredded.
Yesterday they were bombing and nearly killed us. How is it possible to live like that?
As Russian forces advance on Mykolaiv, its fate may depend on peace talks that resume today with Roman Abramovich apparently recovered from his alleged poisoning. And the atmosphere was noticeably less toxic. Ukraine's draft deal, neutrality with its security guaranteed by the UK and others. The Russians said they would build trust by radically scaling back operations in the northeast and here around Kyiv. But there's no let-up in the assault on Mariupol, a city stripped of civilization. The Russians believe there is more territory to conquer before they're ready for peace.
Welcome to BBC London, I'm Telu Adeoye. As Russian and Ukrainian delegations meet in Turkey for face-to-face talks with hopes of a ceasefire, more refugees are starting to arrive in London. We've been speaking to 5 women forced to leave Ukraine who are now living in a hotel here. Jamie Morland has been hearing their stories.
I was trying to stay in my flat and I couldn't stay because I was so afraid. It was really so scared. Even when you hear some noise, you can't sleep because you're afraid.
Alla was one of the first Ukrainian refugees to arrive in London.
It was amazing, yeah. Before war, life was perfect for me. I had my business. I had a flat when it was starting, all this war. They didn't know what I need to do.
Alla and Leonara also fled after their neighbourhoods were bombed.
Все равно ты просто за всем скучаешь. Я скучаю очень за ванной, просто за своей ванной, не за какой-то. Просто вот за всем. Кажется, что тебе даже деревья, и ты за ними скучаешь, за теми деревьями, которые просто разбомбили.
Это ненужная война. Это просто бессмысленная жертва людей, детей. Это бессмысленно. тот момент, когда мы выезжали из страны, именно в наш район, дом, соседний дом, попала ракета. Ну, мы решили выехать за счет того, что просто дом тряхануло хорошо так. Ну, хорошо почувствовали, что рядышком где-то происходит что-то нехорошее. Это было так страшно, просто страшно.
We drove to Kremenchuk, and in Kremenchuk I saw my family, and like I have grandfather, he's 19 years old. I said to him what I have to drive to abroad because now it's war, and he couldn't believe me what it's war now, because when he was young it was war, and now when he 19 years old, it's also war.
Ksenia and her mother have an uncertain future after their area was destroyed.
Мы надеемся на мир. На мир в ближайшее время. Хочется, чтобы это остановилось.
Самое главное, перестали стрелять.
Да, мы просто не знаем, будет ли куда возвращаться. Потому что дома разрушены.
This hotel accommodating the Ukrainian refugees is owned by Levendy Estates Limited, a company part of the MF Trust, which is run by a wealthy Russian family living in the UK. Dmitry claims the family has always stood against Putin's regime.
I think it's one of the worst events of the 21st century, for sure, and it's a great trouble for Ukraine. It's huge mistake for Putin.
I hope I will return to home. I love my country.
Jamie Morland, BBC London.